Welcome back to Civil Defiance. Tonight we are going to talk about the final frontier of human inequality. Forget money, land, or even political rights. We are talking about the currency of existence itself. Longevity research, the quest for radical life extension, perhaps even biological immortality, is sold to you as a triumph of science, a victory for all mankind. I call it the Uni-Party's ultimate consolidation of power. It is not a victory for humanity. It is the blueprint for a biological dictatorship. If a cure for aging is discovered, and it will be prohibitively expensive, it will not be distributed by a compassionate government. It will be weaponized by the elite. The result will not be a society where no one dies. It will be a society where the rich never age and the poor continue to perish on schedule. This is the most profound class distinction ever devised, making every other form of inequality utterly meaningless. My guests tonight are here to defend the necessary horror of this reality. Dr. Wang, a bioethicist and futurist who studies the systemic breakdown of society under radical change, and Ava Mendoza, a social justice activist and demographic analyst who argues that eternal life is merely eternal resource hoarding. Dr. Wang, let's start with the fundamental ethical betrayal. Longevity research requires massive public investment, yet the profits and the product will be private and exclusive. Is this not, by its very nature, a public mandate to create a biological caste system?
Thank you, Otto, for framing this not as a hope, but as a hostile takeover. You are absolutely correct that the initial deployment will be exclusive, and that exclusivity is where the true ethical cataclysm begins. It's a publicly subsidized path to private, permanent power. The moment the treatment, the gene therapy, the cellular repair sequence, the nanite package, moves from the lab to the market, it becomes the most valuable commodity in human history. The Uni-Party, composed of the ultra-wealthy financial elite and the regulatory bodies they control, has no incentive to democratize it quickly. Why would they? Their current power is ephemeral, limited by their lifespan. A 90-year-old oligarch knows his accumulated power eventually dissolves. If you grant him biological permanency, you grant his power perpetuity. The incentive structure aligns perfectly with consolidation. Keep the life-extending technology rare, expensive, and subject to renewal only under continuous compliance. It transforms wealth accumulation from a race against time into an indefinite tenure on Earth's throne. We are not looking at a future where we conquer death. We are looking at a future where we financialize eternal life for the few.
Ava, Dr. Wang paints a grim picture of permanent financial tenure. Let's talk about the resources. The planet already struggles to support 8 billion mortal, aging humans. If the richest 1%, the Uni-Party's ultimate ruling class, stop dying, they stop yielding their accumulated wealth, property, and power. They become resource black holes. Is the pursuit of immortality not, therefore, an act of planetary sabotage against the rest of humanity?
It is worse than sabotage, Otto. It is a declaration of biological warfare against the future. Every piece of land, every political office, every high-level corporate position, every dollar of capital that would have been freed up and recycled into the economy upon the death of an elite individual is now permanently locked down. They become immortal landlords, eternal CEOs, and perpetual politicians. We already see young generations locked out of housing and opportunity by aging, resource-hoarding baby boomers. Now imagine a class of immortal silent generation oligarchs who never retire, never die, and whose accumulated fortunes grow exponentially across centuries. Their existence is a dead hand on the throat of generational mobility. The longevity research is the ultimate tool for locking down the past and preventing any possibility of a socio-economic future for the mortal majority. The Uni-Party will achieve total demographic and economic stasis, secured by their refusal to exit the stage.
Dr. Wang, the counter-argument is that technology always trickles down. Vaccines, computers, even luxury goods become cheap eventually. Why wouldn't longevity follow the same democratic path? Why would the Uni-Party not, eventually, let the common man live forever too?
Because the political utility of the scarcity is too high, Otto. Longevity is not a smartphone. It is the fundamental determinant of power. Once the ruling class secures biological permanency, they gain the absolute leverage needed to ensure the scarcity remains. They can regulate the components, control the distribution chain, lobby for prohibitive pricing models, and, most importantly, legislate biological stratification. They will use the language of sustainable population control and planetary capacity to justify why the masses must remain mortal. The law will enforce a biological apartheid where the rich are the designated survivors and the poor are the necessary sacrifices. Furthermore, think about the motivation for the average mortal worker. If they know their lifespan is fixed and limited, they are incentivized to work harder, consume more, and remain compliant in the hopes of earning a temporary, high-cost pass to the longevity club. The system requires a desperate, mortal underclass to function. The trickle-down theory fails when the product is the exclusive, non-negotiable right to existence.
Ava, let's explore the social consequences of demographic stagnation. We rely on the natural cycle of death and renewal for everything: innovation, economic cycles, political change. If the ruling elite never leaves, what happens to human creativity and political dissent? Does immortality not just lead to eternal, stifling conformity?
Absolutely. The human life cycle, the finite span, is the engine of progress. Mortality creates urgency, forces retirement, and generates generational turnover, which introduces new ideas and challenges to the entrenched order. When the Uni-Party achieves immortality, they create eternal stasis. They will never relinquish power, never retire from their positions of influence, and never embrace a genuinely new idea that threatens their multi-century accumulation of wealth and authority. Imagine the Senate, the Supreme Court, the boardrooms of the Fortune 500, all occupied by the same cohort of non-aging individuals who have been running the show since the 1950s. Their experiences, their biases, their entire worldview become permanently locked into the global power structure. Innovation that threatens their established capital, like decentralized energy or open-source governance, will be aggressively suppressed by people who literally have all the time in the world to manage opposition. The mortal majority will live in a world governed by the immortal ghosts of the 20th century.
Dr. Wang, this goes beyond power. It goes to the meaning of life. If suffering is part of the human condition, the motivator for empathy and change, does immortality not create a class of biologically and morally detached sociopaths? They will have observed thousands of mortal generations rise and fall, making their lives seem utterly trivial.
It is the ultimate moral divorce, Otto. The immortal elite, separated from the fundamental cycle of birth and death, will lose their connection to the human project. They will view mortal individuals, us, as short-lived, transient resources. We become like mayflies to them, useful for labor, entertainment, or resource extraction, but utterly lacking in intrinsic value. Their emotional capacity will be fundamentally different. They will not mourn mortal losses in the same way, because their consciousness exists on a scale of centuries, not decades. This biological detachment creates a ruling class with zero empathy and infinite patience for oppression. They can afford to wait out any mortal resistance, knowing that the activists and revolutionaries will eventually age, weaken, and die, while the Uni-Party elite remain permanently installed. Immortality is not just life without end, it is responsibility without consequence, leading to a form of biological nihilism enforced against the rest of us.
Ava, let's talk about the backlash. If the mortal majority realizes they are subsidizing a technology that will permanently enslave them, what form does the civil defiance take? Is it a protest, a revolution, or something more terrifying, a war against science itself?
It will be a war against the biological elite. The resistance will focus not on economic redistribution, but on biological disruption. The demand will be simple. If we cannot all live forever, then none of you shall. This creates the ultimate moral dilemma. The mortal majority must decide whether to accept their finite lifespan under eternal oppression or commit an act of defiance that forces the immortal class back into the mortal cycle. The Uni-Party knows this, which is why they will preemptively pathologize death. They will declare that mortality is a disease, a failure of will, or a lack of responsibility. They will use media and education to shame the mortal into accepting their shorter lifespan as a sign of their own inferiority, thus discouraging mass resistance. The ultimate compliance mechanism will be the existential fear of missing out on eternal life, which keeps the mortal majority subservient, working desperately to afford a life-extending dose for their children, even if they can't afford it for themselves.
Questions to our dark Wang. Is there any ethical framework that can justify a stratified longevity, or is this inherently a descent into biological fascism?
There is no ethical framework that survives the reality of resource lockdown and political stagnation. Any framework that suggests a two-tiered existence, one class with infinite time, another with finite time, is a philosophical defense of tyranny. We must recognize that the ethical conversation is already lost the moment the treatment is priced beyond universal access. The only way to ethically pursue radical longevity is through mandatory, non-profit, universal distribution. Since that is antithetical to the corporate funding model and the power structures of the Uni-Party, we must conclude that the current research is not a scientific pursuit. It is a weapon development program disguised as medical advancement. It is biological fascism, and the final war will be fought over the distribution key.
Let's drill down into the social coercion. Ava, if the Uni-Party achieves biological permanency, they will require absolute social and political stability to protect their investment. How will the fear of death be leveraged to force the mortal working class into total compliance?
The fear of death becomes the ultimate disciplinary tool, Otto. Imagine a world where the only way to retain your job, your healthcare, or your housing is to demonstrate absolute political and social compliance. Any act of dissent, a protest, a challenge to authority, a critical social media post, is met not with fines or prison time, but with the immediate revocation of your longevity subscription. The Uni-Party will structure society so that the mortal life expectancy becomes directly linked to one's value as a compliant worker. The high-value, obedient worker gets a 10-year life extension voucher. The troublemaker gets nothing. They transform the basic human desire for survival into a weapon of behavioral control. This is why the Uni-Party loves this research. It gives them the ability to dictate not just your life, but the length of your existence based on your obedience. The price of an extra decade of life will be a decade of guaranteed political silence and submission.
Dr. Wang, you study futures. If the ruling class becomes biologically permanent, what happens to institutions like the Constitution, democratic term limits, and the very concept of generational reform?
They become archaic relics, Otto. The Constitution is built on the assumption that the authors and the enforcers will eventually die, allowing for the natural evolution of governance. When the rulers are immortal, they simply reinterpret the law to suit their infinite timeline. Term limits become meaningless, as an immortal judge or senator will simply find a way to maintain influence indefinitely, whether through perpetual consulting roles or by funding a puppet successor every election cycle. The core problem is the erosion of the fundamental concept of retirement. Power will not be passed on. It will be hoarded. This creates a political structure that is not just static, but ossified. All risk is avoided. All genuine innovation is suppressed. And all new social movements are simply starved of oxygen until the mortal participants perish. The Uni-Party ensures that the ultimate political outcome is nothing ever truly changes again.
This conversation on biological apartheid is exactly the kind of line-walking debate we need on civil defiance. We are here to challenge boundaries and spark real debate. If this episode or any of our topics have resonated with you, or if there's a deeply uncomfortable, highly volatile subject you think we should tackle next on civil defiance, we want to hear it. Don't be afraid of the heat. Give us the topics the established media won't touch. You can send your suggestions through the submission link on our website, https://www.google.com, search q-civildefiance.com, or tag us on social media using #civildefiance topics. Before we return to Otto's final dissection of this future, a quick but necessary message. If you are listening to this episode and want to ensure you never miss our next act of civil defiance, make sure you are subscribed and following our channel on Spotify. Simply search for Civil Defiance and hit that follow button. Your subscription is the fuel for our defiance. Now, back to Otto.
Ava, let's talk about the specific political consequences of an immortal Uni-Party. The core of their power lies in their ability to manipulate short-term crises. If they have infinite time, their political strategies change entirely. How does eternal life change the game of politics for the elite?
It allows for the ultimate long-term strategic oppression, Otto. The mortal politician operates on a 2 to 4 year cycle. The immortal politician operates on a 2 to 400 year cycle. They can afford to implement slow, methodical, seemingly benign policies that only consolidate power over generations. They can pass a small tax adjustment today that, compounded over 2 centuries of non-aging asset hoarding, results in total ownership of the global economy. They can dismantle democratic safeguards so slowly and incrementally that no single mortal generation notices the loss of liberty. They can afford to wait out environmental disasters, knowing they can simply retreat to their secure, life-prolonging habitats while the mortal masses suffer. The Uni-Party becomes capable of absolute, non-violent political attrition. Their greatest weapon is their patience, which is a luxury mortality denies the rest of us. They don't need to win the short-term news cycle. They just need to win the geological cycle.
Dr. Wang, you mentioned the threat of biological disruption from the mortal majority. If immortality is the final non-negotiable divide, Does the mortal class not have a moral imperative to seek the eradication of the technology, even if it means destroying all current scientific progress? Is radical Luddism justified when the science itself is a tool of oppression?
When a technology is purpose-built to enforce permanent tyranny, the question shifts from should we use it to can we allow it to exist? If the longevity treatment cannot be universalized, and we've established the Uni-Party has zero incentive for that, then its existence creates a moral hazard too great to ignore. The Uni-Party will frame any opposition as anti-science barbarism. But the defiance is necessary. The mortal Luddite will be fighting for the right to a meaningful death, and the right of the next generation to have a world that is not owned and controlled by eternal, fossilized minds. The moral justification for extremism arises when the systemic corruption is not merely economic, but biological, creating a permanent, non-negotiable class hierarchy. The ultimate act of civil defiance might be a declaration that mortality is sacred and must be enforced, if only to reset the conditions for genuine human progress and political freedom.
Ava, let's talk about the final act of control, mandatory life extension. If the Uni-Party decides they need a stable long-term workforce, will they not simply mandate the treatment for key sectors, creating a class of immortal indentured servants who are kept alive for endless labor?
That is the final, chilling stage of the Uni-Party's plan, Otto. The choice to live forever will be reserved for the elite. The mandate to live long enough to perform essential, unending labor will be forced upon the necessary working class. Think about infrastructure maintenance, sanitation, or low-level bureaucratic compliance. They will be given a slightly cheaper, highly regulated version of the longevity treatment, enough to ensure 300 years of productive labor, but not enough to give them the freedom or quality of life the elite enjoy. This creates the immortal proletariat, biologically extended, but socially and economically trapped. Their extended lifespan becomes a longer sentence of servitude, rather than a gift of time. The longevity treatment will be written into their employment contract as a mandatory compliance feature, stripping them of the right to choose their own end. That is the definition of the biological dictatorship.
Dr. Wang, Ava, you have successfully dismantled the utopian lie of longevity research. You have shown that in a world ruled by the Uni-Party, this science is not a cure for death, but a cure for political change. It is the ultimate tool for achieving permanent power by locking down global resources and human consciousness. The fear of death becomes the final absolute control mechanism, enforcing compliance and stifling all hope of generational progress. My final concession is this: the only way to retain your dignity in this impending biological hierarchy is to reject the premise of immortality. Dr. Wang, if the fight is not over money, but over the right to a meaningful end, what is the core philosophical battle cry?
The battle cry is the right to exit. We must declare that a finite, meaningful life is inherently superior to an infinite enslaved existence. The ultimate defiance against the Uni-Party's tyranny of time is to choose the dignity of death over the bondage of permanent, coerced survival. We must fight to ensure that mortality remains a universal human condition, not a punishment reserved for the poor.
Ava, what is the single greatest act of civil defiance a mortal individual can take right now against this looming biological class warfare?
The greatest act is to refuse to work for the longevity elite. Stop contributing your labor, your capital, and your political compliance to the companies and institutions that are financing your biological demise. Disrupt the supply chain of their immortality. Starve their research. Your value to the Uni-Party is based on your labor during your short lifespan. The greatest act of defiance is to withhold that labor until the technology is democratized or destroyed.
The Uni-Party weaponizes compassion, they weaponize bureaucracy, and now they are weaponizing time itself. The only way to win is to recognize that the greatest gift humanity has is the certainty of its own end, because that certainty is what guarantees the possibility of a new beginning. If they live forever, we die enslaved. Dr. Wang, Ava, thank you for being willing to stare into the abyss of this future. Before we conclude, a final necessary message. If this episode or any of our defiant conversations has resonated with you and you want to ensure you never miss our next act of civil defiance, you must subscribe and follow our channel on Spotify. Simply search for Civil Defiance and hit that follow button. Your subscription is the fuel for our ongoing defiance. To our listeners, be skeptical of the scientific elite. Question the motives behind the promise of eternal life. Your defiance begins with recognizing that mortality is your final, non-negotiable freedom.